Hello and welcome to This World. My name is Vikram Chandra and this is your weekly wrap of all the big developments around this world. Today we're going to be turning our attention to the Russia-Ukraine war. It's been 2 years since the war broke out and it seems to be lapsing into some sort of a stalemate. What's going to happen here? We're going to take a look at the latest Trident missile failure. What exactly is happening with the British defense system if their missiles fail one after the other? And yes, we're going to be talking about artificial intelligence and in particular NVIDIA. People said that this was perhaps going to be the most awaited corporate quarterly earning report of all time. All of that coming up for you on this episode of This World. But let's start with Russia and Ukraine. The date is the 24th of February 2024. 2 years ago, on this day, Russian missiles hit Ukraine. At that time in New York, an emergency UN Security Council meeting was underway. Envoys were meeting at an odd hour to try and stop a war that was increasingly looking inevitable. All the phones in the room began buzzing more or less simultaneously. Envoys began receiving video footage of the first fire. The war had broken out. Now 2 years have passed since that day. The war continues to rage. There are no winners, only a long list of losers. No one knows how many people have really died. As per conservative estimates, 50,000 civilians have died in Ukraine. In Russia, nearly 150 civilians have died. How about troops? On the 20th of February, the Ukrainian army estimated it had killed or wounded more than 400,000 Russian soldiers. In December 2023, Russia's defense minister Sergei Shoigu claimed that his troops had killed or injured 383,000 Ukrainian soldiers. But like I said, no one really knows how many people have died in the last 2 years. And that's because there are no official numbers. It all depends on whom you ask. The Western countries are often heard playing up Russian casualties. Russia does the same when it comes to Ukraine. Now, earlier this week, Russia captured Avdiivka. This is where the town is on the map, on the eastern side of Ukraine. Before the war began, some 30,000 people lived in this town. Nearly 1,000 people remain there now. This is actually Russia's biggest victory since Bakhmut, which Moscow picked up in May 2023. After Bakhmut, this had become a sign of resistance. But it has fallen now. The Russian President Vladimir Putin called it, quote, an important victory, unquote. Why is it that Ukraine says it can't get forward? Ukraine is saying, we don't have resources, which, if you ask me, is a bit of a hard sell. I'll tell you why. NATO allies have loaded Ukraine with aid and weapons. Ukraine has been burning through them at an unprecedented rate. Now you can blame callousness or you can blame corruption, but the fact is, in the last 2 years, Kiev has actually got just about everything it asked for, except for EU or NATO membership, of course, which I don't think is on the cards. Kiev asked for Patriot missiles from the United States. Washington sent them. Ukraine wanted Abrams tanks from the US, Leopard tanks from Germany, Challenger 2 tanks from the United Kingdom. All of that was given. It wanted long-range rockets, HIMARS, howitzers, you name it. Ukraine got all of that. But despite that, it was not able to make much progress in the battlefield, which may possibly explain why morale is at an all-time low, be it among the soldiers or the people of Ukraine. Now, over the last few months, we've been getting reports of young Ukrainians being forced to enlist. They are scared for their lives. The top brass in Ukraine's military, on the other hand, is scared that they won't be able to hold on much longer if more men and women don't join and if that continuous supply of weapons from the other Western countries don't continue. How many people do they need? Well, could be 500,000. How much Western arms and supplies do they need? A lot. How much Western aid do they need? A lot. And after all of that, Ukraine still doesn't look as if it is going to be winning the war. But if you ask me, I don't think Russia is doing that well either. When the war began, We saw visuals of Russian tanks breaking down midway. Internal drama followed. How could we possibly forget the whole Wagner episode? Its chief, Yevgeny Prigozhin, had a mutiny against Moscow. The world watched Wagner fighters marching through Russian highways, shooting down military jets. Never had Putin's authority been challenged in quite such a manner. Which is why, including I, if I'm to be honest, was somewhat surprised that Prigozhin was supposedly forgiven by Putin. They cut a hush-hush deal. The Wagner chief was told to go to Belarus, but weeks later, he was killed in a plane crash. No one was really surprised. Now, in the last 2 years, Russia has ramped up its military production drastically. When I say drastically, I mean by more than tenfold. Now, Rostec is the Russian state corporation in charge of much of the country's weapon industry. Its industrial director, Bekhan Ozdoev, told the media last year that there's been a growth in production of tanks, of armored vehicles, of rocket launchers, of artillery, of short-range ballistic missiles, hypersonic missiles, and also surface-to-air missile systems. So while weapon supply is supposedly a major problem for Ukraine, Russian troops are comfortable on that front. Remember, Ukraine is dependent on weapon systems to come from the West. Russia is now producing it itself and in increasing quantities. But not only is there a steady supply from domestic manufacturers, Russia is also getting arms from friends abroad. Iran, for example, ever since the Ukraine war began, Russia has been using Iranian Shahid 136 drones. The last 2 years have also brought to the front the emergence of drone warfare. Ukraine's Deputy Prime Minister Mikhailo Fedorov claims that Ukraine has managed to ramp up annual drone production to 300,000. In 2024, Kiev hopes that that number will touch 1 million. One thing is clear. Right now, neither Putin nor Zelensky is speaking the language of a truce. From gas to wheat, supply chains around the world have taken a hit because of this war. The big question is, how can this war be brought to an end? Some countries have offered to negotiate, some have even drawn up peace plans. I'm thinking Turkey, China. But what is a sustainable peace plan going to look like? What are the options on the table? Is any of this even possible, or are we just headed for a continued stalemate? Well, for more of this, we now have with us Lieutenant Colonel Glenn Grant, former advisor to the Defense Minister of Ukraine and a fellow at the Baltic Security Foundation. Lieutenant Colonel Grant, thank you so much for being with us. Let me just begin by asking you, it's been 2 years since the Russia-Ukraine war broke out. How do you see it poised?
Well, I think that you could best describe it as, for both sides, it's a mess at the moment. Although Russia has the advantage, there's no question about that. The recent delays in providing ammunition and weapons to Ukraine from the western side has rather put Ukraine back on the defensive. I think this is only a temporary gap, but it's still bad, and of course it's caused problems with things like the loss of Avdiivka in the last week. Whereas Russia is actually throwing manpower at the whole of the front line in every place that they can. And this is causing Ukraine problems because they're outnumbered in every spot that they're fighting. So Ukraine is on the defensive, Russia is on the attack, but we shall see what happens.
You know, it was being said that this entire war is starting to look a little bit like World War I, where it's a stalemate. Neither side seems to be able to get much of an advantage. But is there a possibility that that's changing now and that Russia could actually get more and more of the ascendancy, and especially if Ukraine's not getting the weapons that it seems to be requiring?
That's quite challenging even for Russia because the tactic, the primary tactic they've been using is throwing fairly untrained people at the front line. And of course, you know, it's all right just to break through and to take a town like Avdiivka by just overwhelming the front line. But then when you haven't got high quality troops and you haven't got people who know how to use armor and you don't have enough radios and you don't have enough, you know, trained commanders, to move beyond just piecemeal attacks is almost impossible for them. So they're not in a stage where they could, even if they do break through the line, they really haven't got the capability to do much with it. So I think we're going to stay in this sort of, as you say, World War I trench configuration for quite a long time yet.
All right, Lieutenant Colonel Grant, so it's looking as if we might be here on the 3rd anniversary of the war, having another conversation to see how it's going. But thank you so much for joining us right now.
Not at all. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And for more on the situation now, we are being joined by Dr. Sergei Markov, former spokesman for President Putin, former member of the Russian Parliament and director of the Institute of Political Studies and well-known Russian political scientist. Dr. Markov, thank you so much for being with us. Let me just start by asking you for your assessment of the situation in Ukraine. It's been 2 years. It's not clear where this war is actually headed.
I think situation in Ukrainian fronts now familiar as World War I. It means that from military technology point of view, such kind of deadlock because defensive side has much more privilege in military technologies compared with offensive sides. So it's very difficult to go forward. And I would say that first American plan to make anti-Russia from Ukrainian by using repressive regime have been collapsed because of Russia start its military operation. Then Russian brief special military operation also have been not successful because the Russian army was not able to take control. And last year, on contrary, offensive for Ukrainian army also have been not successful. So now
it looks like it's basically what you're saying is that it looks like it is a stalemate that could continue for a while, and the world is also getting distracted. All right, Dr. Markov, that's an interesting point of view. Thank you so much for joining us with that perspective from Russia. It's always been such a pleasure talking to you to try and get the Russian point of view. Thanks a lot for joining us. Let me turn now to the United Kingdom. This week was quite an embarrassing one for the United Kingdom. British media broke news that authorities in the UK have been trying very hard to cover up. It's a story that points at Britain's potential incapacity to save itself in a case of a war. Let me tell you what I'm talking about. On the 30th of January, about a month ago, the British Navy test-fired a Trident nuclear missile from a submarine. This test-fire was happening off the coast of Florida. The missile was supposed to fly thousands of kilometers and then land between Brazil and West Africa. But the test failed. The dummy missile went up in the air and then fell right back into the sea, not far from where the submarine it had blasted off from actually was positioned. Now, this, of course, was one of Britain's Vanguard-class submarines. Britain's Defence Secretary, Grant Shapps, was on board the vessel at the time of the test fire. He was witness to the flop show, as was Admiral Sir Ben Key, he's Britain's first Sea Lord. But neither of the men expressed their embarrassment/disappointment in public. They were saving their backs, because what would they say? That the Royal Navy has failed to test fire the Trident for the second time in a row. Trident's last test was in 2016. Back then too, the missile veered off course. Instead of hitting a sea target off the coast of Africa, the missile flew towards the United States. The Royal Navy should thank its luck that it was a dummy warhead. And while at it, here's what else the British Navy should do. Figure out how to reassure the people of Britain that it can, after all, protect them should a war break out. Because the Trident missile flops have given the people of Britain and the allies of Britain a reason, and a big reason, to doubt British naval capacity. Allow me to tell you why. You see, these missiles, the Trident missiles, are the mainstay of Britain's strategic nuclear deterrent. These missiles are made in America. They have a range of 12,000 kilometers. They carry a payload as large as 2,800 kilograms. These missiles are deadly, to say the least. I mean, they are nuclear missiles after all. But for these missiles to act as any kind of a deterrent, these missiles must first be fired successfully, and there must be a certain assurance that they will fly and hit their targets. The submarine from which the Trident missile was being fired on the 30th of January had just had a 7-year-plus refit. What refit it went through, Westminster alone knows, or maybe it doesn't. But here's what's clear. The repeated failures of Britain's main strategic defence system threatens to make the British Navy a laughing stock. The British Ministry of Defence has been forced to admit what it is calling an anomaly. But what happened is much more than an anomaly. And Britain's Shadow Defence Secretary, John Healey, had no qualms in saying that out aloud. Here's what he has said, and I'm quoting, "Reports of a Trident test failure are concerning." The Defence Secretary will want to reassure Parliament that this test has no impact on the effectiveness of the UK's deterrent operation, unquote. Now here's the official position taken by the British military. Here's what a Defence Secretary has said, and allow me to quote from Sharp's statement. He said, "The test reaffirmed the effectiveness of the UK's nuclear deterrent, in which the government has absolute confidence. The submarine and crew were successfully certified and will rejoin the operational cycle as planned. On this occasion, an anomaly did occur, but it was event-specific, and there are no implications for the reliability of the wider Trident missile systems and stockpiles. Nor are there any implications for our ability to fire our nuclear weapons should the circumstances arise in which we need to do so," unquote. Now, it has to be pointed out that the last time the British Navy managed to carry out a successful test of the Trident missile was in 2012. It's been 12 years. Guess how many prime ministers have entered or left 10 Downing Street since then? 5. Like I was saying, this is very embarrassing, and the question is, what is the United Kingdom going to do about it? Because what they really need is one successful test. And then I think everybody in Britain will sleep much better at night. And let me end this show with a theme that you've heard so much from me about over the last few months. The AI revolution. Some people call it AI mania. Many will say it's a transformation of the world as we know it. And this week, we had financial numbers that in a sense underlined everything that is happening in artificial intelligence. Have you heard of NVIDIA? I'm sure most of you have, and if you hadn't, I'm sure you heard of it this week. NVIDIA, of course, world's most valuable chip maker. It's the poster child of AI, if you like, because its GPUs are the GPUs that more or less are behind the entire AI revolution. This week, the company announced that its revenue had surged 265%. 265% from the same 3 months last year. How much does that amount to? Well, $22 billion is what NVIDIA reported. People were expecting $20 billion. It actually came up with $22 billion. NVIDIA also reported that its profits had shot up all through the roof. It reported that it had operating gross margins of something like 76%. That's how profitable it is. And it reported that this was only the start. It said that in the next quarter, its revenue was going to touch $24 billion. NVIDIA saw a gain in its market capitalization of $275 billion on Thursday, and that was only during trading hours. NVIDIA's growth is directly pointing at the rise of AI. NVIDIA's numbers are screaming to the world that artificial intelligence is a force to reckon with. Let me just explain that in some more detail. NVIDIA sells GPUs. GPUs are essentially, well, chips on steroids, AI chips on steroids. GPUs can be used for a variety of functions, and NVIDIA's chips have been used for that in the past, all the way from gaming to cryptocurrency mining and so on and so forth. But particularly important right now, these GPUs are being used for artificial intelligence. They power data centers. What companies like Meta or Amazon or Google or other companies do is they buy NVIDIA GPUs, they put them into data centers, and then that is what artificial intelligence runs on. OpenAI, by the way, does the same thing. Now, NVIDIA's numbers are indicating that a large varieties of companies and a large number of companies are stepping up their investment in those chips. Data center business for NVIDIA up 400%. It is the bumper sale of these chips that have made NVIDIA one of the world's most valuable companies. It has put the company in the same league as Amazon, Alphabet, Apple, Microsoft. And it is happening because many of those other companies are putting NVIDIA GPUs into those data centers and are using it to power artificial intelligence. And that is the reason why Jensen Huang, the founder and CEO of NVIDIA, speaking about his company's earnings, said this, and I'm quoting. He said that accelerated computing and generative AI have hit a tipping point. He added, demand is surging worldwide, across companies, across industries, and across nations. Look what is happening in the world of biotech. Biotech startups are using AI. What could that mean? It could mean that all the things that we are living with, whether it is cancer to Alzheimer to drugs that are required for a vast majority of human conditions, AI will be used to put that into steroids. You will have new drugs being generated in half the time, maybe a fraction of the time than used to happen earlier. You will have cures coming up in a large number of places that you didn't think cures were going to be possible. But it's happening elsewhere as well. Search engines, of course, are using AI. Newsrooms are using AI. And then the downside, tech companies replacing workers with AI. Or perhaps they are hiring workers who are skilled at AI. But in any case, that is a change that is going to continue to happen. It is a revolution, ladies and gentlemen. I've been saying it for a long, long time. I'm going to keep on saying it. It is a revolution out there. It's going to have its good aspects. It's going to have its bad aspects. And the bad aspects do need to be kept in mind as well. The job losses I was talking about, that's a bad aspect. And there could be worse. Here on This World, I've often spoken to you about the existential threats that could also underlie this. Yes, everyone's in this arms race to create AI and to make it better and better. But what when you do get to something like artificial general intelligence, intelligence that is as smart as we humans are, or perhaps even smarter than humans, super intelligence, is there an existential risk? Those are also questions that we're going to have to think about. But for the moment, this week, I'm going to leave you with those numbers once again. NVIDIA's results and the stock market graph of NVIDIA this week. Look at it. They, in absolute numbers, in financial numbers, is the AI revolution playing itself out in your lives, in a company near you, and clearly at the stock markets. And that's all we have time for this week on This World. But we'll be back next week with a fresh lineup of the biggest stories around the world. My name is Vikram Chandra, and you're watching This World on WION World is One.
African Union leaders condemn Israel's offensive in Gaza as the most flagrant violation of international humanitarian law. The summit accuses Israel of exterminating Gaza's inhabitants and tells it to immediately end operations. Two-pronged protests take place in Democratic Republic of Congo, capital of Kinshasa. While on the one hand, protesters accuse the West of supporting the M23 rebels in the conflict-hit East, the women are fed up with the fighting in Goma. And a sculptor in Gabon transforms salvaged paper into fine art. World of Africa, at these times, only on WION World is One.